Hello, good morning, and welcome to this Dawn Busters Taste Challenge. We are doing two Canadian blended whiskeys on this cold winter, freezing winter morning. 28 degrees. AccuWeather says, Bing says it's 26, so maybe it's 27. All right, so here is Harwood Canadian whiskey, a blend, aged 3 years, imported and bottled by Duncan Harwood Distillers Company, Bardstown, Kentucky, but it's actually Heaven Hill. And I put the link below showing you their website listing. It's got a pretty duck on the label, pen and ink drawing. It's got this light red maple leaf, so it's an attractive label. I found the plastic bottle at Total Wine, not Total Wine, Dorgnac's. $14.99 at Dorgnac's. I think the price is the same. They do have glass bottles, but I just did not see them. Okay. Here's the competitor, Crown Royal Bourbon Mash, later renamed Blender's Mash. I got a bottle of the Bourbon Mash. I know where to find. I can still find bottles of it. Bourbon Mash if I want more of it. Runs about $27 a bottle, 28. Yeah, 27, 28, 80 proof, so it's not high proof. It's got this cream colored bag with gold writing, gold stitching. It's got a unique bottle design. But like I say, you might find a bottle and it's almost the same design, but it'll say Blender's Mash, not Bourbon Mash. But yeah, it was Crown Royal, meaning Diageo. Crown Royal was trying to make a Canadian whiskey in the style of bourbon. You know, at least 51% corn, aged in new charred oak barrels. And we know it's at least 3 years. Canadian whiskey has to be at least 3 years. Okay, now, but it's not a bourbon, but they call it bourbon mash. A bourbon mash bill could have rye in it, wheat whiskey, barley malt whiskey. But then there was a big uproar in the United States when this hit the market. The U.S. government allowed it. They say, yeah, that's cool. You're not calling it bourbon, you're calling it bourbon mash. But these bourbon companies protested so much, and they got a lot of influence, that the U.S. government, after letting them put this on the market, spending all this money on the labels, decided, you can't call it bourbon mash. We changed our mind. So they had to change it to Blender's Mash. Then the excitement died off after all of that, and they finally discontinued it last year. So it's too bad because it's really good. All right. $14.99 for the handle. About 27, 28 for the 750. That's assuming you can find it. Like I say, it's pretty much gone. But I bought this at Mathern's. They had a few bottles left. Then it was gone. They sold it all. And then there's another store close to New Orleans that still has probably 5 or 6 bottles on the shelf. Not that I'm buying anymore. I'm not going to. But if you want to, International Market has it. Set that down right there. Now, Ronnie S. was asking, how come they changed it from Harwood's, apostrophe S, to Harwood? I think the reason is because it no longer belonged to Harwood's. Duncan Harwood, that distillery shut down around 1952, went out of business, and the distillery's all demolished or repurposed and something else. It's not there. Since it's not owned by Harwood's anymore, it's just a brand name. They call it Harwood. It's not a real company. Heaven Hill is, though. They own it now. I think it went through a few owners. The original, then they went out of business. Then somebody got the rights for it. They probably waited around till the trademark expired, and then they just scooped it up, public domain, in 1969. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it just went defunct, and they scooped it up and got a trademark for it, Harwood. And then at some point, Heaven Hill got a hold of it. I can find out. Let's see. Heaven Hill, our history. They got Admiral Nelson's rum in 2011, by the way, if you're interested. I don't know where they bought Admiral Nelson from. They acquired Hypnotic, Hypnotic. You see that around in 2003. Don't know where they got it from. It's basically what they do. They go around buying other people's stuff and build their company by buying maybe brands that aren't doing so well or whatever. Uh, 1989. I knew it was a long time ago. That's right. 1989. They acquired Burnett's Gin, Henry McKenna Bourbon, and Harwood. And I think they got that from Seagram's. I bet you they bought that from Seagram's because Seagram's, I'm pretty sure, are the ones that bought Harwood. But you see, Seagram's started to go down, down, down. And starting in the late 80s, they started selling off their brands. Now, that's never a good sign, right? Good eye, Ron. Is that Canada versus Canada there? Yep. This is an intra-Commonwealth struggle, but I never do cross-styling. I only do Canadian whiskey versus Canadian. Well, I mean, unless I'm doing rye whiskey, because I've got some Canadian rye whiskeys and I've got some U.S. rye whiskeys. Those are the same style. So, yeah, I cross those because that makes sense. But Canadian blended, I only go against other Canadian blended. Okay. So Seagram started to sell off a bunch of brands. They sold like 16 brands to Sazerac in 1989. And looked like they sold Harwood, Henry McKenna, and whatever that other one was to Heaven Hill in 1989. Then they turned around and sold like 15 more brands off to the Jim Beam Company in 1991. I mean, it was just like it was like a slow collapse. Funny thing though, because they kept introducing new brands. Like they introduced Seagram's VO Gold in 1998. 2 years later, they were out of business. The whole thing was sold. They sold every distillery. They sold all their trademarks, all their recipes, everything, and it no longer exists. Good old public domain free agency, right? That's what happened to Marvel Comics. They got a hold of Captain Marvel from DC because DC, National Periodical Publications, they had gotten a hold of Captain Marvel, Shazam, Captain Marvel, and they only wanted control of it because they felt it was a competitor to Superman from Fawcett Publications. Fawcett, Fawcett. They owned Captain Marvel, and they had a long court case, which Fawcett won, but then it cost them so much for the court case that by the time they won, their company was going down anyway, probably for other reasons. They just end up selling everything to DC, all their characters. So DC ultimately won. They lost the court case, but they won the war. And but they didn't do anything with Captain Marvel. They just left it dead. They didn't produce any books, any Captain Marvel characters. They did nothing. They just said, we have it. But they stopped paying attention to the trademark. Now, Marvel Comics, Cadence Industries, Marvel was watching that trademark, and they were like, look, Are these people that dumb that they're going to let the trademark actually expire and go into public domain? Which means once it's expired, if you don't renew it, anybody can take it over. Sure enough, 1968 comes along. They did not renew it. So Marvel Comics was like, haha, dummies. They ran to the trademark office. Boom, trademark Captain Marvel name. DC didn't even notice and came out with the comic book, Captain Marvel, which was a space guy, had nothing to do with Shazam or anything. But DC about had a heart attack, because they're like, oh no. And so they could never use the name really Captain Marvel again. And that's why they made these movies called Shazam that went nowhere. And Marvel didn't do anything really with Captain Marvel. They had a space comic book, and it wasn't really very popular. And I used to read it sometime, but it was like some kind of weird metaphysical, like space saga stuff. And I was like, I was a little 10-year-old, 8-year-old. I was like, I don't know what all this is about. And neither did anybody else. And so it got canceled. And then they made a woman Captain Marvel. Like this woman looked like Roxy Roker. And she was in the Avengers. And it was like, it was a joke. But they just kept doing that to keep the trademark alive. So Marvel still has a Captain Marvel character, very low profile. And they do it only to keep the character, the trademark going. And they keep renewing it. And then they have Ms. Marvel, a woman. Captain Marvel is funny. Yep, cool. All right. Okay, y'all, get ready because here we go. Okay, y'all, it's time to get nice. Crown Royal Blenders Mash. I don't know if that's sold in Australia. Harwood's, that's sold here in Louisiana. I know, I bought it in Louisiana. Not widespread, you understand? No, I mean, it's just at one store that I've seen. Maybe I did see that glass liter bottle at doggone Savannah Discount, but I wasn't gonna buy it. It was like the same price as this, but close to it. I don't remember. It was something like that. But you know what I'm saying. I had it. That's it. I bought it. I'm not buying another one. It's done. This thing will last me 10 years anyway. Rich grains, rich sweet grain, like corn, rye, barley, which is probably what it is. Corn, rye, barley. Could it have wheat in it? It could. Possible. Doesn't really matter. Canada, they just say it has to be whole grains. Can be syrup. Can't be syrup like corn syrup. You could use whole corn. Fine. What percentage? Doesn't matter. Long as it's aged in wood for 3 years. At least 3 years. Could be 300 years if you want, but 3 years. Can you add flavoring to Canadian whiskey? Yes. Can you add coloring, like caramel color? Yes. You don't have to, but you're allowed to. Doesn't disqualify. In the U.S., see, it's a little different, depending on the class of whiskey. Oh, this smells like bourbon. Charred oak. There's like smoke, not like scotch, smoke. I'm not talking about like that, but oh yeah, it if you gave this to somebody cold and they didn't know what it was, I don't mean cold in temperature, just cold, like say, hey, try this. They might say, oh man, what bourbon is that? I love Kentucky bourbon and so forth. You'd be like, I gotcha, it's Canadian. It's from Manitoba, which is one of their provinces. We call them states. In Australia, they say states. We have states, but they have provinces in Canada. Okay. New Zealand does not, because New Zealand is just one state. It's a single. There are no states in New Zealand because it's small. They have districts like North Island, South Island. Like we have counties. You understand? New Zealand was actually invited to join the Commonwealth of Australia, but they're like, nah, we're too far away, 1,000 miles away. They say no, thanks. And we'll become our own country, which they did. Same king, King Charles III of New Zealand, King Charles III of Australia, King Charles III of Canada, same king. There's the crown and the pillow, but different parliaments, different legislatures, different flags, different laws. Just like we got the same president, depending on who you think that is. But you know what I'm saying? Different state legislatures, but we got a national legislature. And they got the Commonwealth, the king of the Commonwealth, Charles III. And they have meetings, but they don't have a legislature for the Commonwealth. There's no parliament of it. They just have meetings about every 6 months or a year. They talked about doing that back in the early 1900s, like about 100, right around before World War I started. They were like, oh, let's make an imperial parliament for the whole empire, and then, or Commonwealth as they started to call it. But then they decided, nah, that's too complicated, and we don't need it. We'll just have meetings sometimes. Yeah, that's better. They said, all right, that's a better idea. All right. I think this is Harwood because it's a lighter and less charred oak. You understand? Okay, let's go with the taste. Cheers. Our Australian whiskey, I never heard of that. Australian bourbon or brandy. I know they make it, but I never seen it around here. We get Australian wine, a lot of Australian wine in the United States, mostly from Western Australia, I do believe. Australian beer, yeah, we get a little of that. Sometimes you see Coopers, not too much. We got one from what do you call it? Tasmania. We had gotten that one time. James Bogue, didn't last. And a few others, but not too much. And of course, Foster's, but it's U.S. produced under license over here. It's a contract beer with Miller. The Miller Brewing Company in Fort Worth, Texas makes Foster's under the strict supervision of Foster's. You know what I'm saying? No, there's not a guy from Foster's sitting there looking at the beer all day like, oh, hey, mate, do this way. You know what I'm saying? It's just a contract. They say, do it like this. Okay. And then they'll go out there and supervise sometimes, check in maybe twice a year. Oh, how's it going? And they ship the special yeast from Australia to Texas, and they'll ship a special, those Pride of Ringwood hops, which come from 2 farms in Australia. One in I keep trying to say Tanzania, Tasmania, and the other one on the mainland. But I mean, beyond that, they just say, hey, do it like this, and they do it, simple algorithm. These big beer companies, it's a science, not an art. It's a science. They follow the algorithm. I think Foster's would be a lot more popular in Australia if it was 5%. And then they offered the 5.5% ale, the premium ale, the Foster's Special Bitters that they have here. They call it Special Bitters, where they change the name to premium ale. That would be popular in Australia. I think. This I do not know. But it's not popular in Australia. A few stores have it, but it's way more popular here. It's kind of like old Milwaukee here. Like you could find it, but who drinks it? Very few people. Sweet grain. Here we go. Sweet grain. Sweet corn. Maybe a little rye. I'm not going to walk it in this weather. I'm going to wait till it warms up. Calling it, well, it's not going to really warm up, but it'll be more tolerable. Usually I'll be walking by this time. Kind of plain, but very pleasant. So a little bit plain, but very pleasant. Nice, well made. Harwood. Who makes it? We don't know. It could be made by Crown Royal under contract just to make it. They might have excess capacity, and they might contract to still 2 days a week. We don't know. They're not going to tell you. It's going to be secret. Oh yeah, bourbon. But yeah, but when you realize that Heaven Hill owns the Black Velvet Distillery in Canada, why would they pay somebody else to make Harwood when they have their own distillery in Canada? Common sense, right? It's probably made there. Can't say though, but I don't know. But you would assume so. Um, but it's all bottled down in Kentucky. Sazerac does the same thing. They bottle all that stuff in Frankfort, Kentucky. They ship it down, I guess, in some kind of tanker car. Charred oak, corn, sweet corn, or if you live in Europe, maize. They say maize over there. I know they say maize because I was just in Europe last year, and I was looking at the beer cans, and they have ingredient lists, and it said maize. It didn't say the word corn. It said maize. I said, I know that's Indian corn. But see, that word doesn't have any meaning in the United States. No one says maize. They might say, oh, that's the old word for it. That's what they'll say. They used to call it, you know what I'm saying? Like, but nobody uses that. That's not a common term here. At all. And if you do say maize, people might think you're talking about Indian corn, like the red corn, the blue corn, the ones with the polka dots, the different color corn. That's what they're going to think. But if you go to the grocery store here, obviously on the shelf is going to be, in the produce, going to be corn on the cob, and canned corn, cream corn, All right, so there's no real contest here. This is obviously the blender's mash. It tastes way better, and it better be, because it's $27 versus $14.99 for this huge bottle. So it's a mismatch, but hey, it's out there. They're both Canadian whiskeys, so yeah, letter C. C for Crown. All right. Now, okay, so Harwood's lost. The first one was a draw. I couldn't tell them apart, so I got it wrong. When Harwood were going up against Black Velvet, really they taste like the same whiskey. You say, uh-oh, it's the same whiskey in two different bottle labels. I hope that's not true, but it sure tasted the same. Same company. And then I went up against Crown Royal. It got killed. I went up against Crown Royal Black. No chance. Impossible. No chance of survival. I went up against Crown Royal Bourbon Mash. Obliterated. But to be fair, on its own merits, not going up in a competition, it's really nice. I'm sipping on it right now. It's a delightful little product. It's not fascinating like, oh, this Canadian whiskey, I can't believe it. It's so great. It's nothing like that. It's just like, oh, this is a really good Canadian whiskey. And it's for a great price. So if you're looking for a very enjoyable, but not remarkable, but a very enjoyable Canadian whiskey, and you want to only pay $14.99 for the big handle, there is your answer right there in front of you. Harwood. Thanks for watching, everybody. Y'all have a nice cold Tuesday, unless you're in Australia and it'll be warm.